We will go ahead and get started. I just want to welcome everybody to Terror in Transit. This is the first in our summer webinar series exploring the harms, threats, impacts of the Gibbstown LNG export terminal proposed for construction and operation on the banks of the Delaware River. We are very, very fortunate to have our lead advocate and activist on this issue for the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, but also for the region, and that is Tracy Carluccio, Deputy Director of the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. Thank you, Tracy, so much for being here this evening for everybody.
Thank you, and thank you, Maya, for joining and leading the seminar tonight.
Oh, yes. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Maya Van Rossum, the Delaware Riverkeeper. And so welcome you. And I have the great honor of working with Tracy every day, day in and day out. We are going to, everybody's on mute, and we are going to accept questions at the end of the presentation. Tracy and I are going to have a dialogue where she's really going to lay out for us the project, as well as some new information having to do with the transportation route associated with the Gibbstown LNG export terminal. But at the end, after we've had our discussion, we are going to take questions from the audience. We're going to ask you to please put those questions in the chat box. You can queue them up as the conversation goes along, but we'll just look at the chat box at the end and put all your questions to Tracy at the end of the conversation. So with that, I'm just going to start, Tracy, by asking you if you could please just broadly describe for us what exactly is the Gibbstown LNG proposal.
Okay, well, thank you, Maya. Well, first, I think let's look at where it is. This is where that red X is, the Gibbstown LNG export terminal location. And if you don't already know about it, I'll give you a brief description. Delaware River Partners, a subsidiary of New Fortress Energy, wants to expand the Gibbstown Logistics Center, which has one dock and one berth. It's not operating yet, it's still under construction, to add a second dock, which would double the size of the facility, a second dock with two berths. And that would be used to export liquefied natural gas, which is a new product that was not planned for this site, and also natural gas liquids overseas. The Gibbstown Logistics Center is a deep water port. It's in Greenwich Township in Gloucester County, right where you see that X there. It's on an old DuPont munitions manufacturing site. The reason it's all green is that site has been shut down for several decades now, and it operated for over 100 years. It's a highly polluted site used by DuPont and then other industries as well, up until about 20 years ago. The property adjoins the backyards of Gibbstown residents, which are just right to the south a little bit there. And there's a daycare center there, athletic fields, schools, public buildings. It's all right there adjoining the site. The terminal is across the river from Tinicum Township that you see right there. It's 2.7 miles from Chester, which you see going downriver a little bit. And upriver, there's the Philadelphia Airport. It's only about 1.9 miles away. And it's about a 15-minute drive if you go upstream to Philadelphia. So that's the site itself, and that's what they want to be doing there.
So the liquefied natural gas, the LNG that would be exported from this site, where is that going to come from exactly?
Well, they have a plan. It's a very convoluted plan. And the company that has proposed this, Delaware River Partners, is a subsidiary of New Fortress Energy, which is also building a liquefaction plant in Bradford County, Wyalusing, Bradford County. And that plant, which is under construction, it's actually going into a pause mode right now, but they would take gas from fracked gas wells in Pennsylvania's Marcellus Shale, and they would send it to New Fortress Energy's processing plant there on the banks of the Susquehanna River. From there, it would be loaded into trucks or rail cars, and then it's transported south through Pennsylvania and New Jersey communities, and you can see that here. This one shows the rail route. There's 4 different routes. We're going to be explaining that, but it travels south through these communities for over 200 miles to finally where you see that ship, which is the Gibbstown terminal. If New Fortress Energy gets its way, this would be the first time liquefied natural gas would be processed in such large quantities and on inland, not on an ocean front. And they say they're going to be producing about 3.5 million gallons at that liquefaction plant each day. And it will also be the furthest overland transport of this magnitude of liquefied natural gas in the nation. It's also the first to transload these volumes of liquefied natural gas directly onto waiting ships. And that's going to occur, according to them, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year at the Gibbstown facility, what they call Dock 2. And also it would be the first LNG export terminal on the Delaware River and the first in New Jersey. So just to think a little bit about what does first mean? Well, it means it's all an experiment at the public's expense. There's no safety record to consult. There's no relevant transportation history concerning accidents, spills, and derailments. There's no real risk history that can be studied or analyzed to find out whether or not this is safe. It means from Wyalusing to Gibbstown and everyone who lives along the potential transportation routes, we're all being used like guinea pigs, basically. It's basically an accident waiting to happen.
Okay, so just to really, you talked about the first and you just talked about the safety analysis. And I guess I really just want to put an emphasis on something that we heard you say by asking you this question. So are you saying that there have been no safety analyses of this transportation plan?
There has been no safety analyses of the transportation plan. There's been no risk assessments. There's been no traffic studies that show how many accidents could be expected. Now, I'm going to talk about this in the next slide, but there is a special permit that was issued for this project for rail transport of LNG, and they're required to do some analysis of emergency planning along the route and to train people along the route. But as far as we know, that has not yet begun.
Okay, so do you want to go to the next slide and give us some of that additional detail on how, in fact, the gas is going to get from Wyalusing to Gibbstown?
Right. So there's 2 modes of transport that are proposed. One is the truck you see up top there is a cryogenic tank truck. And they're currently used, but not widely used. They're mainly used from taking small LNG facilities production to other inland production, mainly in New England. There's also small plants like the one that is in Philadelphia that's being expanded that use the LNG produced at the plant for adding additional supply during winter months or when the demand for gas goes up. So these are all small projects with a limited amount of trucking. So there's very little history about how many trucks, for instance, end up in an accident on the highway and what exactly happens when that occurs. What we have learned from the oil train big experiment is that people die when there are derailments, for instance, and from crude oil explosions. And we learned that as traffic increases, then accidents increase. And that's what we expect with the trucks. Now, down below there, you see a transport vessel that is used. It's a rail car. And this is the type of rail car that has been approved for a special permit to New Fortress Energy subsidiary Energy Transport Solutions. And it's a 50-year-old design. It's never been tested on the railways for LNG. It is not considered to be safe, particularly because since they got their special permit to move the LNG, from Wyalusing to Gibbstown on rail cars of this type, there has been a federal rulemaking that has now allowed anybody, any carrier, to move by rail car LNG across the nation's railways. And in that rulemaking, they required extra safety measures to be added to these cars because they did not consider them to be safe enough. For instance, an extra heavy jacket on the outside. The cars that are going to be used by New Fortress Energy subsidiary for the Gibbstown project are not required to have that safety measure. So we know, even by the Pipeline Hazardous Material and Safety Administration standards, they're not safe.
So what do we know about the dangers of LNG transport and handling?
Well, we do know some things. There has been a ban on the movement of LNG since the beginning of using rail for hazardous materials, because it is very difficult to handle. And when there's an accident and a release, it's very difficult to control. We know that, first of all, it's a liquefied cryogenic flammable gas. It's basically liquid methane. And we know that it's cooled to at least minus 260 degrees Fahrenheit. It's very dangerous to handle and store, and brings with it what they call unique safety hazards. If LNG liquid is released, it creates a serious safety hazard for those who are nearby. Exposure to LNG can cause extreme freeze burns immediately. Spills that catch fire and burn, they burn extremely hot and bring with them the risk of serious burns, second-degree burns within 30 seconds for those exposed within a mile. And for those who are closer and exposed to the frozen liquid, it's instant death. Spills that occur as a result of a release of the LNG to the atmosphere immediately volatilize, and they can cause what's called a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion. And the explosive force of that is similar to a thermobaric explosion, which basically is a catastrophically powerful bomb. That's why people call these bomb trains and bomb trucks.
Wow. So that's all very scary sounding. Can you give us a sense of what an LNG explosion or fire actually looks like, to give us a real sense of?
Right. Well, there's not a lot of history on this. Like I said, they haven't done extensive studies, but these are two pictures of a tank car, train tank car exploding on the left, and the other one are two trucks that exploded. So that gives you an idea of what can happen when LNG explodes and catches fire.
All right, so you've given us a good sense of what we're looking at here in terms of the overview of the project, and touched a little bit on the transportation route. I'm wondering if we can dig in now a little bit more on the transit routes, and can you tell us what are the possible truck and rail routes in a little bit more detail than we've already discussed?
Right, so on the left, we have rail route A, and on the right, we have rail route B. Now, we had to piece together these routes because they are considered to be proprietary and protected by Homeland Security. So we have not been able to get a publicly disclosed route from any agency, or even from the PHMSA special permit. What we do know in the special permit for the rail route is they can only use these rail cars to go from Wyalusing to Gibbstown. The way that we figured out the route was by consulting with railroad experts. We consulted the handbook that's used to lay out the various railroutes and who owns them. We talked to union representatives and workers from the railroad, and we were able to now confidently say that it will probably be one of these routes, Route A or Route B. The rail cars that will be used are the DOT 113C120W, that's the specific rail car that the special permit names. and they would take it from Wyalusing down to Gibbstown. And as I said, this could change. We don't know this for sure, but we do think that this is reasonably, probably the #1 most likely route. We do know, what tracks, for instance, leave Wyalusing, and we do know, for instance, that they have to use the Delaware Bridge in Philadelphia to get over to New Jersey. So we have some certainties there. For Rail Route B, we're going to go through this a little bit later as well, but we think that this also could be a likely route, and because of the advice that we've been given by our railroad experts. And that route would travel actually past the Delaware Riverkeeper Network's office in Bristol, PA. We used to see the oil trains go by there all the time, and it would travel up towards Trenton and expose the people of Trenton in that region to the danger of a derailment. It would not cross the river at Trenton, though. It would turn and go south along the Pennsylvania side of the river, and also use the Delaware Bridge to come across. And we'll show you a little bit later, but the Delaware Bridge comes into New Jersey in Pennsauken, right that area there, and then travels south to the Gibbstown facility. So the next slide shows the 2 possible truck routes. Truck route A, we think, is probably the most likely route. This is put together again by experts who have advised us on this. And we studied the various routes that trucks usually do use for hazardous materials. We have not had this confirmed by any agency, but we did the best we could with the advice that we got. So truck route A looks like it would, travel south. As you can see, it basically leaves Wyalusing on a highway there. It's not a big giant highway like 476. It's a local highway, 6, then it joins 29, goes down 309, 115, and then it joins 476. And those who live in Philadelphia or anywhere along the 476 are very familiar with the Blue Route. And as you travel south, it goes through Allentown all the way down, and then comes down, joining 95, going south on the Pennsylvania side of the river a little ways, and then coming across from Chester on the Commodore Barry Bridge into the Gloucester County, and then up a little bit to Gibbstown. Now, like I said, these truck routes don't have to be disclosed. What we did find out by queries and Freedom of Information Acts with the highway administrations, the various departments at the Department of Transportation federally and also locally, is that they don't have to disclose these, and they can change. Certain trucking companies like to use certain routes more than other routes. So they have not hired the trucking company yet, as far as we know. So we don't know for sure what the favored route would be of the trucking company. So there is another route they could very well take, and it avoids some expense in terms of tolls on 476, but it's similar, as you can see, leaving on 6 and then going down at Scranton and joining 380, and then coming over and taking that jog on 80 that many of us do if we're coming south from that area, and then go south on 476, and then hit the turnpike and travel over and go south on the Pennsylvania side of the river, on the New Jersey side of the river, crossing just south of Trenton and coming down to Gibbstown. So those are the 4 possible routes.
So I know that people are eager to get a little bit more of an understanding of what these routes might be in general, but also what it might mean for them. So could you describe the interactive maps that the Delaware Riverkeeper Network has published? And what do they show us about the routes and about the community impacts?
Thanks, Maya. I'm going to be bringing them up. It might take me a couple seconds here to find the...
And while you're looking for that, I'm just going to remind people, some people came after we got started. We're going to be doing questions at the end after Tracy and I talk. And so if you have questions that come to mind while we're talking, feel free to just put them in the chat box as we go along. All right, looks like you're ready to roll, Trace.
Okay, great. So this is an interactive map that Delaware Riverkeeper Network commissioned from Fracked, so the premier map maker, not only in Pennsylvania, but in other places in the nation. And they have put together this interactive map for us, and we're going to explore it a little bit. But first, I want to explain that when you open this map, it's on our website, by the way, and we will be at the end sharing back with everybody who's registered where it is on our website, but it is on our Gibbstown LNG ongoing issues page right now. And you click on that and it comes up and it says if you want a bigger screen view to click on this link, and then this is what comes up. And you get a splash page. And the splash page is really like a little tutorial to show you how to use the map. And the map is interactive, so it allows you to zoom in and zoom out. You can pan around. You can look at various transportation routes for the LNG in between Wyalusing and Gibbstown. And we'll show you how you can actually zoom in and get really close. So we explain here what I pretty much just explained is that there's 2 truck routes, 2 rail routes that are potential. And what we have done is mapped along these routes what we call the high hazard zone. And in that zone, we show by US Census population, by census block group, the demographics for vulnerable low-income and minority populations. We also show childcare centers, public schools and private schools in the map, and we'll explain as we go along. You can zoom in and out by hitting the in and out, the plus and the minus zoom button up at the top. We're going to function that for you in a minute. And then if you want to get back to where you were, you hit the little house icon over here and it takes you back to where you opened the map in the beginning. There's also the map, just so you know, when it opens up, there's a default. It's just this sort of a vanilla to start out, and that's truck route A, and it shows the low-income demographics. And then you can turn information or layers of information in the map off and on using the layer list icon. And that is the first from the left over here, this icon. Can you see the icon when I'm pointing to it? I don't know if that shows, but it's this, yeah, okay, that's the layer list icon. And then that's dropped down right now, and it shows a list of data sets. And you can look at the symbols along these data sets and identify the various pieces of information or layers of information that you want to layer onto the map. So and we're going to actually do it so you can see how it works. I'm not the most technical person in the world, and I figured it out. So I think all of us with a little, a little bit of time, will be able to figure this out. Also want to let you know there's other things here. There's a base map gallery. You can change what the base map is. You can print the map. You can share the map. So there's a lot of functions that you can explore. It's very cool, and you can. It also gives GIS coordinates if you want that. So very, it's a pretty complete package that Fracked Tracker has brilliantly put together for us. That's pretty much, the description of the map, Maya. And I can move on if you want, but I think.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Go ahead.
Apologies, I was talking. So can you tell us a little bit more about the high hazard zone and what that includes, and what are all the various colored bubbles and circles that are on this map? What do they represent?
Okay, so as I move this map, you're going to see that you can see it begins up at Wyalusing where that little circle is. And then there's like an area that's colored light around the purple line, which is the route. So let's say we're moving down, we go through Wilkesboro, Barra, and we come to Allentown. And we're seeing here now this high hazard route as we move along. And what that high hazard route is 2 miles on either side of the route. And the reason that we chose the 2 miles is because we received advice from our LNG hazardous material transportation expert and LNG expert. And we also consulted what agencies are saying to the public. So PHMSA, the Pipeline Hazardous Material and Safety Administration, and the safety map that is used by fire companies advises a 1 mile evacuation should there be a derailment, for instance, of an LNG train. And then when a derailment occurs, however, because if there is the chance of a fire and explosion, fire companies in the most recent accidents have established an area of 2 miles that they automatically evacuate. And that's in order to protect people and get as many people out of the area where the highest impact would happen the quickest. It does not mean if you're outside of that 2 mile high hazard area, you are safe. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that if you're within that 2 mile high hazard area, that area is going to receive the brunt quickest and with the most intense impact. So that's the high hazard area. Now bubbles. You asked about the bubbles. So the bubbles that you see here, now we're showing right now truck route A. So if you'll see, I'll turn off private schools. Those bubbles went away. They're the blue bubbles. Now they're back. I'll turn off public schools within 2 miles. Those bubbles are just turned off. They're like an orangey color. They came back on just now. Now I'm going to turn off the child care centers. They were purple. So now the child care centers have come back up. So these are all of these schools and daycare child care centers within 2 miles along the entire route.
Sorry, I'm mute again. Could you help us now in terms of understanding more of what we can see through this interactive map? Perhaps zoom in on Philadelphia and tell us, explain for us what we see through that zoom in? Yes,
I'll do that for you. So to set the stage for Philadelphia, sorry, it's a little slow loading. What I'm going to do is zoom in a little bit. Well, first what I'm going to do is take off the truck route A, take off the low income areas because we'll examine them in more depth when we zoom in. And I'm going to put on the rail route A. And that's going to show up here. First, just the route, that orange line, so you can see what that is. Then I'm going to layer in the low income areas, and those are populations that are classified as low income according to the US Census. And now I'm layering in the minority population areas and their population density. And that is, again, according to the most recent census block data. So if we move down, we see these areas colored. And as we get down, we get a little closer to Philadelphia, just like you can do. I'm going to type in Philadelphia. And you can type in, your own hometown, for instance. And it zooms into Philadelphia. The base map is going to automatically change to a street view that is going to give us a view of the actual streets in the area. And we're looking here now at Philadelphia, and we're going to zoom in so we can get a little better look of the rail route, the most likely rail route. As you can see, it's coming down along the Schuylkill River. It crosses the Schuylkill River right at Fairmount Park. I'll zoom in a little bit more. So you can see right here, it comes down. There's Kelly Drive. This is Fairmount Park over here. It's taking a little time to load. It crosses the Schuylkill River, and then it enters Philadelphia. And if I turn off the low income areas for a minute, you're going to get a view of the density of the minority population areas along this route. And you can, as you can see, if we move this over so you can see a little more of Philadelphia, as we zoom in, maybe that's a little far in, but as we zoom in, we can see, what are the areas along and within here's the 2 mile high hazard zone. We can see there are areas here, like let's look at this one. You click on it and it tells you, okay, the minority population density here in this portion of the census block depicted has a density of 22,989 people. It's normalized to per square mile because the census blocks are not exactly the same in size. The census has different sizes. So in order to understand this, the minority density per square mile is shown. Every place you see a dark area, you're going to see that there are high numbers in terms of minority density per square mile. And that means that the people who live in that census block along this route are mostly minority populations. They're a highly dense minority population. It's the same thing for the low-income areas. In some places, the low income very much matches the minority population, but not in all areas. But clicking on the low-income areas, here's one here, the low-income population, low-income density per square mile, 27,713. So that means that the density of low-income people that are right next to that rail route and within the high hazard zone are it's mostly low-income people. Now, the other thing that we can do here in order to get a look at some of the features when you zoom in is look at some of these dots. So let's look at this bubble. That's Strawberry Mansion High School. We can see that there are 387 students there. So we can actually see and get a picture of what is along this route in terms of schools. Here's the Dick Williams School, 577 students. Right almost on the route is the Education Works at Edward Gideon, and that is 999 students practically on the rail tracks. And then we can come over here and we'll look at one of the child care centers, for instance. This is on Tioga Street, and the population at that child care center, 999, and they're right along the route. Here's another one, Brightside Academy, Early Care and Education, in this part of Philadelphia, 180. And we can look also at the private schools. There's the Key Learning Center, and that does not have the population available in terms of how many people there, but you can see, you get the idea. So these bubbles actually show you who would be sitting in the school and how many of them, should there be a derailment along this rail route.
It's very clear that anybody along this route has a lot to be concerned about in terms of threats, harms, and potential impacts. Are there additional transport impacts from the proposed Gibbstown LNG export terminal that are outside of the interactive map that we've just talked about?
Yes, there are. I actually want to bring our PowerPoint back up to show you this.
And again, just reminding folks while Tracy's doing that, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat box.
So here's a picture of a liquefied natural gas tanker ship. We don't have the route for this, but we can describe it. This tanker ship is about, and the ones that they're going to be using, and they have their approval to use from the agency, is about 173,400 cubic meters in capacity. It's a very big ship. It's bigger than the ships, for instance, that carry the natural gas liquids out of the Marcus Hook facility. It's bigger than a lot of the ships now, most of the ships that now go up and down the Delaware. Each year, they would fill these ships round the clock, as I said, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, and they would send these ships down the Delaware River, past southeastern Pennsylvania, Chester, which I said is just a couple miles away, past Wilmington, down the Delaware Bay, past Delaware and South Jersey Bayshore communities, and then out to sea. And the destinations for this, according to New Fortress Energy, are Shannon, Ireland, where New Fortress Energy is planning to build a LNG import terminal, Puerto Rico, where they're also planning to build an import terminal and a power plant, and other locations that they have named in various places. In order to really nail it down, it's difficult, but we do keep up with their Securities and Exchange Commission filings and their other industry reports. And they say they also are going to be they have contracts to send it to Angola. We know that they currently send from a small facility in Florida, LNG to Jamaica, and they say they're going to continue that. So there are other destinations as well, but a lot of it is shady and kept under wraps. We don't really know the full story. I would like to say that in both Ireland and Puerto Rico, there is huge opposition to these LNG terminals. And in Ireland, for instance, there's a major policy change underway, and that is to replace liquefied natural gas imports and other dirty fossil fuels with carbon-free renewable energy. And that they're also doing this in Puerto Rico. And it's from the ground up, a groundswell of opposition to these import terminals. And in Ireland, they've even, because of the new government that's been formed, it's on the verge of actually banning all LNG imports. And if they do that, completely, then they will not be taking any of the LNG, not only from New Fortress Energy, but from the Gulf Coast, where another LNG terminal is supposed to receive it in the south of Ireland. So this public opposition opposing New Fortress Energy's planned import terminals is something that actually, we have connected with, where we are connected and talking with and sharing seminars and webinars with these folks. And as a matter of fact, we're going to be hosting a webinar on August 6th. The date has just been confirmed, featuring a representative from Puerto Rico's opposition movement, and Jeff Tittle, who works with the Sierra Club down there opposing the import facility. So that's on August 6th at 7 p.m. And then also the next week, we're presenting a representative from Safety Before LNG, which is the grassroots movement fighting the Shannon facility that New Fortress Energy wants to build there. And they're working through at all levels to get the proper policy changes in place through the new coalition government that has been formed in Ireland. So that's sort of this path of LNG ships. It's dangerous, and it's again, LNG, there's a glut of it right now, and they don't really have enough places even to sell the gas that they're producing. But if they were to start churning these ships out, it would add to that traffic. And we can expect to see, accidents and problems result because of that. And then lastly, the other thing, Maya, that I would like to mention about other impacts outside from the transportation route, because there's a lot of impacts related to the Gibbstown facility and the Wyalusing facility. We're not so much focusing on that tonight, but regarding the transportation route, during transportation, there is leakage, and it's leakage during the transloading as well. And when you look at fracking and liquefied natural gas greenhouse gas emissions, they really are deadly to our global climate. And that's because natural gas is primarily methane, and that is the most powerful of greenhouse gases in terms of heating the atmosphere on a 20-year time scale. And we know that this is the period of time when scientists insist we must dramatically be reducing greenhouse gas emissions in order to meet the global climate goals that nations have agreed to. And for instance, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says limiting warming to the 1.5 degree level that everyone has agreed is necessary will require reducing greenhouse gases by 45% by 2030. But you can't do that. You absolutely cannot do that if we continue to develop frack gas. And if we go ahead with this new LNG export scheme that New Fortress Energy has put together, and now the Trump administration is of course thrown in with as well. So we really need to be ratcheting back all greenhouse gas emissions, but particularly methane. A new report just came out of Canada just within the earlier part of, I think it was the end of last week, that said that unless we address, this was a British Columbia, Canada report by David Hughes, unless they stop the LNG development that they're planning on doing there, they will not be able to meet the climate goals set either in British Columbia or in Canada. Because it just is not controllable. We hear from the industry, and that's with a 15% decrease trying to plug leaks. When we hear from the industry, we got to do, we can make this better. We'll just ratchet the places where it leaks. We'll close them up better. No, it's inevitable that this gas is going to escape. It can't be controlled, and it's part of the entire life cycle, cradle to grave, of fracking, and of course of LNG.
So before we go on to some questions, and we've got a bunch of great ones lined up, do you want to tell everybody quickly about the next sessions in the summer series?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Maya. Yes, next week, Thursday, July 23rd, we're going to be having a special seminar with a featured guest, Karen Feridan of Brooks Gas Truth and the Better Path Coalition, and myself. And we'll be looking at our resolution campaign that our LNG coalition has put together. We have local government resolutions for Pennsylvania and for New Jersey that can be used as samples or models by local governments who want to pass resolutions opposing LNG transport through their communities. And these resolutions are aimed at the Delaware River Basin Commission because they are reconsidering right now whether or not to give the penultimate permit that is needed for this project. We're fighting that through an appeal process. The DRBC is right now reconsidering whether or not they will approve that permit that they originally rushed to judgment on last year. And because of that, we're trying to quickly get as many resolutions as possible into the DRBC saying, do not approve this project. Another entity that we're focusing on are both the governors of Pennsylvania, Governor Wolf, and Governor Murphy in New Jersey, in order to tell them that this is unsafe. There have been no studies done. They should do studies, and they should also stop the projects that New Fortress Energy wants to build. So that will be next week. And then we have other, as I mentioned, on August 6th, we're going to be having explaining the Puerto Rico connection. And then the week after that, the time is not confirmed yet. It needs to probably be midday. The next week, we'll be doing the Irish connection. Also, just so you know, Maya, before I forget to say, we do have a petition campaign going, and we're going to be sharing the petition link again with folks. We need people, huge volumes of people, to express their individual opposition to this project by signing the petition and sharing it. And that petition is going to the Delaware River Basin Commission so we can speak directly to those commissioners, the governors of the 4 states, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, and the Army Corps of Engineers, who are going to vote about whether or not this project goes ahead. So we need a lot of petition signatures this summer before we hand that petition in to them.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Tracy. So we've got a lot of great questions. We're lots of great questions and short on time. So let's see if we can get through them all. We might have to hold you over a little extra time. So James Stewart asks, we have been discussing on our chat group about getting the word out about this route and facility on social media in Burlington, Camden, and Gloucester counties. What is planned for attending council meetings in each town, New Jersey and or PA, to provide them with information about the LNG transportation and the Gibbstown facility?
Thanks, Jim. That's a great question. Well, the answer is we have a resolution for you. The resolution is not just a resolution. It's a document that is very rich with references, and it explains through the whereases exactly why this facility is dangerous for the people in the area. And for you, you are right, you're ground zero in Gloucester County, and the communities there should all be able to pass this resolution. And I am happy to work with you. Delaware Riverkeeper Network staff is happy to work with you. And if you attend next week's webinar, we have a specific tutorial that Karen and I will be doing to explain how you actually accomplish this. There are a couple steps to it, and there are important steps that you need to take in order to have a successful resolution effort in your municipality. But that is probably, at this moment, the best way to get that information out to your town about this dangerous proposal.
So the famous Karen Ferridan from Burke's Gas Truth and Better Path Coalition, who will be joining you on the webinar series next week, she has a question. Will Trump's trashing of Nepa affect these and other plans for LNG export?
Well, Maya, why don't you answer that? Because you just filed a really interesting Nepa argument.
Yeah.
I mean, I can address it too, but go ahead.
Well, so we actually, we filed litigation this week on the 401 certification rules, but there is as well by the Trump administration a big effort to roll back the National Environmental Policy Act, which requires the government to look broadly at the ramifications of a proposal. And yes, if the rules that have just come out are allowed to hold, that it absolutely will undermine the full fair consideration of the ramifications of the Gibbstown LNG export facility and every other major federal project to come. So that's the long and the short of it. And you know, for projects like this, that National Environmental Policy Act review is critically important to bring together all the strands of potential environmental, community, even economic impact to make sure that our government officials are engaged in informed decision making. The Trump administration is really, through their new rule proposal, seeking to undermine that very seriously, roll back those reviews, and it will undermine the transparency, it will undermine the amount of information available for review, and it will very seriously compromise the ability of people to engage in the public process through NEPA.
You know, one thing I would just add, because some people might not know this, Delaware Riverkeeper Network is appealing the 3 major permits that have been given for the Gibbstown project. We've just completed the hearing for the reconsideration of the docket that was given by the Delaware River Basin Commission, the one that we think we have a real chance of overturning. The other one was from the Army Corps of Engineers. They gave their approval, and our argument is that they didn't do NEPA. So undermining NEPA will have a direct effect on this project because they truly did not carry out the requirements of NEPA in their review and approval of that project. The other permit, by the way, that major permit that the project cannot move ahead without is the waterfront development permit that was given by New Jersey DEP, and we have also appealed that permit. They made tremendous errors in the environmental analysis associated with the Coastal Zone Management Act and the Flood Hazard Act. So
I think that you've already answered this question, and the answer is going to be resolutions and listen to next week's webinar. But just so Marilyn Quinn knows that we're paying attention, she says, what do you recommend be done on the township government level? So I think that you've well answered that in response to Jim's good question.
Yeah, thank you, Marilyn. Marilyn is a member and yeah, thank you, Marilyn. That's a good question. And you and Jim, I know, are, on this.
Ann Carroll asks, have the Camden County freeholders been consulted on whether or not they approve this route through Camden County?
They don't have to approve the route through Camden County. The federal government gives approval for these routes. That's why you'll see our resolution doesn't say, Governor Murphy, you should stop this transportation. The federal government, because of federal law, has the jurisdiction that allows them to move hazardous substances on our rail and on our public highways. But there are other things, that can be done, and we talk about that in the resolution, particularly emergency management training and that sort of thing. But so Camden County does not really have a say in this. I would like to say, that Camden, we looked at Philadelphia, Camden is equally impacted. The minority populations in Camden, the low-income populations in Camden, again, are very dense and clustered in the 2-mile high-hazard area along the route that would go through Camden in order to get down to Gibbstown. Woodbury is another community, and Paulsboro as well, that are basically environmental justice communities that are being violated again by an environmental nightmare, potential accident waiting to happen. Another thing I would just like to mention is that some counties have been supporting this. Gloucester County used, their everything they had in order to approve a highway bypass to allow this project to occur. That bypass is not built yet, but is supposed to bypass the entrance to the facility, which right now goes right through Gibbstown. It goes 10 feet from people's homes. And as a matter of fact, they've been plagued with truck traffic over the last year as they built Dock 1. And we tried to get that stopped, and people from the town and myself, and we tried to get our legislators involved. Nobody cared. They didn't care. And they just let all those people suffer. But anyway, they're trying to, so one of the requirements from the Army Corps of Engineers permit is they can't move the LNG into the site until that bypass is built. But Gloucester County threw in big time to give the approvals for that.
So I think Barbara might have typed out this question. I thought I saw it coming in before you did the slide about climate change. But just I think she asks if there is any specific information about methane and VOC leaks from the train cars and from the ships. Do we know how much methane and VOCs will in fact be released?
We don't. There should be. We argue this, and maybe Barbara would too. They should have to do that analysis. We should be able to. Technically they should be able to do it. So why doesn't PHMSA require them to do an analysis of what the leakage would be? They know how many miles it would be. They know, how much leaks from a rail car or from a truck, and there should be an analysis. So there's a lot of black holes that we have had to piece together information about, and we certainly don't have all the answers, but that is something that should be done.
So Barbara asks also about linking to the opposition in terms of LNG ports outside of the US. And just to confirm, as you've said, Tracy, we're going to be making those connections in the upcoming series.
That's right. Yeah.
And yes, you ask about the PR, whether or not we have somebody from Puerto Rico speaking on August 6th, and that's all well in hand. We've got some great partners making those Puerto Rico connections for us. So thank you for that question and letting us emphasize that. James Stewart wants to know whether Chris Christie has made any public comments about LNG transporting to Puerto Rico.
Well, I think the reason that he probably knows about Chris Christie is that there was a scandal that came out within the last few weeks about New Fortress Energy and the way that they were awarded the contract for the LNG import terminal and the fracked LNG power plant there. And it is a voluminous report. It was very professional and put together a story of what sounds to be even criminal activity on the part of New Fortress Energy. And as a result of that investigation that was done by an investigative association there, it came out that Chris Christie is a consultant and has been paid as a consultant on this project in Puerto Rico. So the one thing I can say is that this project has been carried forward by the Murphy administration, but it began under the Christie administration.
Wow, so disappointing all the way around. So Brian Keeler asks, I've read that each train coming out of Wyalusing will contain the equivalent of 4 Hiroshima bombs. Is this accurate? If so, how about the humongous ships leaving Gibbstown? The explosive potential would be inestimable on these ships. Terror in transit indeed, exclamation point.
Thank you, Brian. It is terror in transit. In terms of Hiroshima bombs, I think that's anecdotal. I haven't seen any scientific references that supports the power of a Hiroshima bomb. What I have seen is descriptions of LNG by scientists that have studied it that says that basically a thermobaric bomb explosion is equivalent to what would occur should there be a release of LNG. Now, as you can imagine, if you have 100-car train, which is what New Fortress Energy eventually wants to build up to, they say they're going to begin with 20 cars at a time, but they want to go up to what's called by the industry a unit train. And if they go up to 100 cars, the magnitude of an explosion where more than one car or many cars are derailed is absolutely terrifying. And when you look at Lac Mégantic in Canada, for instance, where the crude oil train derailed and 49 people were killed. Some of them, they never even found any parts of them at all. They were incinerated immediately. And the town is still completely drenched in crude oil. Their aquifers are ruined. Their community is totally ruined years after that occurred. And that crude oil is not nearly as dangerous as LNG when it explodes. And that's because it's reduced by 600 times when it goes into that vessel. So when it's released into the atmosphere, it expands immediately and it volatilizes and turns out into the atmosphere 600 times greater than that one vessel. And that's why it has that powerful bomb effect.
So David Rogers says, I am concerned about the age of the railroad rails that the LNG will travel on. Do you want to remark on that?
Yes, I know that the folks in Wyalusing, Protect Northern PA is an organization that has formed in Wyalusing area, very dedicated and committed people to stopping the LNG liquefaction plant that New Fortress Energy began building up there on the Susquehanna River. And they've been doing some research into the condition of the tracks and the bridges. And we know that they are old. We know that that the Norfolk Southern line that leaves there has not been used for this type of heavy traffic. And we know from our LNG expert, Fred Millar, that these train cars will be very heavy. And because they are so reduced down and it carries so much volume, they're going to be much heavier than many of these tracks have carried over the years. When we were fighting the oil trains a few years back, particularly in Philadelphia, because it received 25% of the crude oil from North Dakota when PES refinery was operating off of North Dakota fracked crude. we know that we did some research into the tracks and the bridges, and we know from union members themselves and from safety associations that these tracks are old. Some of them are 100 years old, and particularly weak areas are bridges and areas where they go over a bridge. As a matter of fact, a freight train in Paulsboro, just 4 miles north of this site, went off of a bridge, crossing the little creek there in Paulsboro, and released vinyl chloride into the atmosphere, poisoning the air, and many people were adversely affected by that. Lawsuits were brought, and it was an absolute disaster. And that's the kind of thing that can happen in these old bridges. So yes, it's a great concern that there is, not an analysis that shows that the weight and the speed of these trains can be handled by these old track systems.
So one final question. This also comes from James Stewart, and he is really asking about what kind of materials and information might be available to people like him to bring this message to their community members.
We have a great fact sheet that has basically, a summary of all the really sort of nuggets of information you need to explain this project to people. The fact that the dock is going to require 45 acres of dredging of the Delaware River and the impacts on the water quality and the Atlantic sturgeon, the short-nosed sturgeon, and special vegetation and other freshwater mussels and other species that live in the area, the huge environmental impacts on the region in terms of air quality and water quality. These are all things that are brought up in this fact sheet along with the transportation issues. So that fact sheet is on our website. Peter, who is here on from Delaware Riverkeeper Network, is going to be sending out a recording. This is being recorded, and he's going to send out a recording to all the registrants after this, and also putting it on our website. But we have a link to that fact sheet that you can download and share with people. It's just a front and back sheet. In it, however, are references where you can find more information. Also, I would like to recommend you go to Delaware Riverkeeper Network's webpage on this, because we really have packed the information in there. We began when this project first reared its ugly head in June of 2019. It was sprung on us, and we connected the dots, thank God, because from people like Brooke Lenker with Fracked Tracker, who called up and said, hey, they say they're building a liquefaction plant up here in Wyalusing, and they're going to send the gas down to the Delaware River for export. And we connected the dots by figuring out it was the same mother company, even though the local companies had different names. And we started filing FOIAs, and we did a lot of detective work and figured out what this project really is, cradle to grave, a disaster. But that information we have archived and put on our website. We have files that we got. All of those files available on the site. History as we move along, from the newest thing down at the bottom on up to the top, our very first entries, and then a huge amount of supporting information, links to studies and all sorts of information. And that is on our website. If you go to our homepage, ongoing issues, and in the search put Gibbstown LNG and hit enter, you will be brought there, and then you click and you're on that page. And it's several pages long with a lot of references.
Great. So with that, we have come to the end of our evening. We want to thank you, Tracy, so much for this fantastic information. We want to thank Fracked Tracker. We want to thank in advance Karen, who's going to be part of this next week. And we want to thank all of you very engaged and obviously well-informed people who are going to help us bring this message to the world and defeat the Gibbstown LNG export facility, either through our advocacy or through the Delaware Riverkeeper Network litigation, probably through a combination of both. So thank you, Tracy, and thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next week.